Okay, how we all doing? All right, so earlier tonight I told you what the great Command Sergeant Major Joe T. Hill's message was at the memorial ceremony earlier, right? The power of prayer. Well, let me tell you just how powerful the power of prayer is. So remember about a little bit after 8, and I was up here talking, right? You remember that part? You remember, Mario? It was just a little while ago. Okay. So I had my phone up here with me, and because I want to make sure I stay, keep track of time. Now, earlier in the day, we had the memorial ceremony, and I made sure I put my phone on silent. That was important. You got to put your phone on silent. So then I got back to the room, and I plugged my phone in while I was doing some work at my desk. And I knew the boss was probably going to be texting me. I knew some other folks probably going to text me. I said, let me take the phone off silent so that, by gosh, if somebody texts me, it's important, I hear it. So I take my phone. And there's McNearney. He's trying. McNearney, you're trying, but you beat me to the punch there, John. You CSMs, you guys are sneaky. So anyway, I took my phone off silent up in the room, came down later on, put it in my pocket, started doing our thing, came up here, put my phone up here. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the invocation, remain standing for the presentation of the colors of the national anthem, right? And I stepped back. I'm an old general's aide. I know when to step back. And then all of a sudden, I'm back there, and Dave O'Connell is up here giving this great prayer. And I said to myself, I'll be a son of a gun. I left the phone on loud. And so I'm like praying back there. I'm praying. Please don't let that damn phone ring. Now, my ringtone, go ahead, John, try it again. Go ahead, do it again, John. My ringtone's a great tone. Do it again, John. Well, you're just going to have to trust me, because the thing is, my ringtone is, for those of you, for anybody that knows me more than a minute, you know that I'm a New York Yankee fan. Well, my ringtone is the great Terry Cashman song, Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. Well, no, it's not. It's ringing, but it's just not ringing loud enough. Anyway. The power of prayer works, CSM Hill. I just want you to know the power of prayer works. Okay. Hopefully everybody's had a great meal. You're eating your dessert right now. And so it's my great honor to bring back to the stage the chairman of the 7th Corps Desert Storm Veterans Association. Okay, Rick, we got it. To bring back General Franks. Please welcome General Franks.
Okay, it's my great privilege to introduce our honored guest speaker and great friend this evening. You have his biography there in the program, but please allow me to highlight a few parts of it. He was born the 28th of November, 1942 in Luawai, Kauai, into a family where his uncle served in the famous and much decorated 442nd Infantry Regiment, Gopher Broke, called the Nisei Regiment. Inspired by his own family and that selfless service, he earned an appointment to West Point and graduated from there and was commissioned with a class of 1965. He and Patty were married soon after graduation. His class, unusual for the time, did not get any basic officer course. And Rick found himself on a ship getting instructed by a non-commissioned officer on his way to Vietnam. In his first tour, he was an artillery forward observer for the 2nd Battalion, 9th Artillery in the 25th Division, and was wounded in action. He returned to Vietnam on a second tour after a stay at Tripler Army Hospital in Hawaii. He was commander of Troop A, 3rd Squadron, 5th Cavalry, 9th Division, and was wounded stepping on a landmine and lost part of his right foot. He returned to active duty in 1971. And he spent the better part of 10 years serving in a variety of command, armor and cavalry command assignments in Germany. It was in Schweinfurt, Germany, I first met then Lieutenant Colonel Rick Shinseki and his wife Patty, as Rick commanded the 3rd Squadron, 7th Cavalry. I was fortunate that after Rick finished command of the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, and I had assumed command of 7th Corps and had a vacant G3 position, that Rick was available, and I couldn't wait for him to report for duty as the 7th Corps G3. Now, we shared the great events. Neither of us knew that was going to happen, as you don't sometimes in the Army when change comes your way. But we shared the great events of that era as the Iron Curtain opened the fall of '89. And together I personally witnessed that near Hof, Germany with the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. Rick was always a strategic thinker, but always with his soldier heart rooted and committed to soldiers, non-commissioned officers, who, as we all know, are the keys to victory. He would often talk later as Army Chief of Staff about mastering the transitions. I remember that often. As G3, 7th Corps, he surely helped us do that, rewriting our new training concept to fight the Corps as a Corps in more maneuver-oriented scenarios than the terrain-focused Cold War GDP. As a matter of fact, Tom Goodcoop, who commanded 466 and has a large contingent here, was my G3 planner, 7th Corps in Desert Storm, and Tom was in the G3 when Rick was the G3. So we served together. As a matter of fact, Tom and Bob McFarland were 2 of the 8 planners I was allowed to have when we were secretly planning for 7th Corps to be deployed, as you saw in the video. And so as the G3 7th Corps, Rick was involved in getting our mind out of the defensive terrain-focused scenario of the Cold War into something different, and we thought more offensive-oriented, movements of contact, movement over long distances. And coming up at that time was the Battle Command Training Program warfighting scenario for the Big Red One in Fort Riley, Kansas. So I asked my G3 then, I said, Rick, why don't you go get on an airplane and go out and tell Tom Rame that we're going to change the scenario and from the old GDP-focused scenario. And so off he went and did that, and he may have some words about that. Tom, of course, as I learned about him, did that superbly and went off and did the exercise, taught us all a lot about the new types of scenarios, but also told me a lot about Tom Rame through the eyes of my friend and G3, Rick Shinseki. We also had a new training concept, fighting the Corps as a Corps, instead of not small, but sizable pieces, but focused on terrain defense. A totally different thought, and he was right at the center of changing that. He commanded the first team, the 1st Cavalry Division, down at then Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos, then became the Army G3, then returned to Europe as the Commanding General of the United States Army Europe, and also the Commanding General of the Stabilization Force in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where I had the privilege to visit him. John Gingrich was there at the time. and I saw his extraordinary critical thinking, strategic critical thinking skill in action. And I believe set that in motion there as the commander of the S-4 for later success. Impressive. He was then selected to be Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, and following that, selected to be the 34th Chief of Staff of the Army on the 22nd of June, 1999. On February the 24th, 2000, as Army Chief of Staff, he was our distinguished guest speaker at our 5th reunion and our 8th Desert Storm reunion. He was the first Army Chief of Staff of then many to come and speak at our reunion. And I personally wanted him to come back again because I enjoyed it so much the first time. He was just beginning a formidable and visionary transformation of the United States Army to include strategic education for the General Officer Corps, which continues to this day. If you think about that. It started that in July of 2001, 3 months before 9/11, when all of a sudden the Army needed a massive transformation. But he had already been thinking about it and had the Army moving in that direction. Following the 9/11 attack, he personally, with our Army and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, guided our highly successful early actions in Afghanistan. Later, in open and courageously candid congressional testimony, he offered advice on what it would take following an invasion of Iraq in 2003. Public courage comes in different dimensions for senior officers, and as our Chief of Staff, he set an example for all time with that public testimony. And as many senior leaders inside and outside the Army have observed later, he was right. He retired from active duty after completion of his duties as our 34th Chief of Staff on the 11th of June, 2003, after 38 years of exceptionally courageous and distinguished, forward-looking, visionary service. President Barack Obama nominated General Shinseki to be the Secretary of Veterans Affairs his very first day in office, and General Shinseki was confirmed the very next day and became the 7th Secretary of Veterans Affairs, serving until May 2014, bringing strategic transformation vision to the VA just as he had the Army, and a total commitment to the welfare of individual service members for conditions incurred during their service in peace and war. He focused the VA workforce on 3 fundamental behaviors: people-centric, results-oriented, and forward-looking, and 3 priorities: access, backlog, and homelessness. More than 2 million additional veterans were enrolled in VA healthcare during his tenure. He oversaw an increase in the number of veterans receiving VA disability compensation by almost 1 million veterans, 3.06 to over 4 million. The number of veterans receiving disability for post-traumatic stress disorder more than doubled during his tenure. During his tenure as Secretary, he reduced the backlog of disability claims by more than 40%. He focused significant VA resources and manpower on eliminating VA homelessness, veteran homelessness, achieving a reduction of 24% between 2010 and 2013, and creating the conditions and systems that resulted in 55% reduction between 2010 and 2020. In 2010, Secretary Shinseki made the decision to award presumptions of service connection for certain diseases that may have been caused by exposure to Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. By the summer of 2012, nearly all the 230,000 claims received for Agent Orange presumptions had been processed, putting $3.6 billion into the hands of Vietnam veterans and their survivors. Secretary Shinseki was a staunch supporter and advocate for more veterans courts to better assist justice-involved veterans, increasing them from a mere 4 to 5 veterans courts when he became the VA Secretary by 2015 to 260. As Secretary, he directed the execution and implementation of the GI Bill, a massive increase in VA educational benefits. The number of VA educational beneficiaries increased from 564,000 in 2009 to over 1.1 million in 2015. And at his initiation, he convened a Gulf War study group at the VA that operated the entire time he was VA Secretary, which has directly application to our Veterans Group, with setting in motion research and programs that have continued, and I think you see and you heard of some of today in our VA presentation, great VA presentation this morning. His leadership, I believe, as VA Secretary and member of the President's Cabinet, driven to fulfilling the implied trust of President Lincoln's vision for the VA to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan. General Shinseki has been awarded the Bronze Star for Valor with 2 Oak Leaf clusters, Purple Heart with an Oak Leaf cluster, the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, Distinguished Service Medals from the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard. And Patty and Rick are proud parents of Lori and Ken and proud grandparents of 7 grandchildren. On October the 12th, 2023, AUSA presented General Shinseki its highest award, the George Catlett Marshall Award for exceptional and distinguished service to our Army and nation. I told General Bob Brown and Rick, I don't think the AUSA has ever made a better choice for the Marshall Award than General Shinseki. His selfless and courageous service and uniquely transformative vision in duties from Lieutenant to Army Chief of Staff, then Cabinet Secretary, continues to inspire generations and has so well and faithfully fulfilled the sacred trust of those he was entrusted to lead, as well as our nation. General Shinseki is currently chairman of the board of the Army Historical Foundation. A fellow Jayhawk, a great American, a truly distinguished, selfless, and humble American soldier, the 34th Chief of Staff of our Army and the 7th Secretary of Veterans Affairs, my great friend, General Rick Shinseki.
Well, good evening, everyone. Lots of old friends and associates in the audience, and General Franks told me he was going to make some brief remarks, an introduction. I wish my mom were here. She would have chuckled in surprise. Patty and I are honored to be with you this evening at this Desert Storm reunion dinner. And it's personally gratifying to watch as you renew your friendships and remember and reflect on what binds you together forever. Our thanks to General Franks for including us in this celebration. He's invited me before, and I've always sort of demurred because I'm not a Desert Storm veteran. he prevailed this time. And I'm honored to be here, sir, really am. And our best wishes to Denise when you get home. I also know that some who fought and won Dared the Storm with you, some whom I knew best, are no longer with us. And so I salute the 7th Corps, honoring them and their families with such warmth and dignity. I too miss them greatly. I served in 7th Corps headquarters at Kelly Barracks for a very brief period of time, 1989, 1990, but it was a significant time for the Army and the Army in Europe. Those days with Tom Goodcoop. As I said, I'm not a Desert Storm veteran, so I stand here this evening a little bit awkward and trying to talk to the 7th Corps about what you did 33 years ago. But I'll give it a shot. General Franks has alluded to my background, and as some who may be less familiar with it, you know, I feel like I've been a soldier almost all my life, and that's not true, of course. But when you're born in Hawaii about a year after Pearl Harbor, and you grow up under martial law as a kid, and then you choose to serve in the Army for 38 years, it seems like forever. My grandchildren sometimes delight, as I begin reminiscing about my childhood, they delight in reminding me, Grandpa, World War II was in the first half of the last century. And so it was. And you, Jayhawks, fought the Army's last campaign of that century, the last campaign of the 20th century. And how I envy you all. You all know the details of your magnificent victory against Saddam's vaunted Republican Guards Army far better than I could ever describe. But let me spend a few minutes on a pre-Desert Storm story and then a little bit on the aftermath. As General Franks has already described, in October 1989, the Cold War was coming to an end. I don't think we realized it. I certainly didn't, as the newly arrived G3 of 7th Corps, working for General Franks. I do remember it was confusing and a bit alarming. For weeks, border reconnaissance units all along the 7th Corps sector had been sending spot reports of East Germans taking down the wire mesh fencing, raising border barriers, taking anti-tank mines out of the ground, which had been there for 3 or 4 decades. Something was going on. These activities coincidentally corresponded with the very indicators in our NR sequence of our go-to-war plan. Mesh fencing coming down, barriers going up, mines coming out of the ground, signaling an impending invasion by the Warsaw Pact. At least that's what our plan said. And so after we'd received enough of these reports, the staff, me included, recommended to General Franks that he alert, recall, and deploy the 7th Corps to our General Defense Plan battle positions, our initial battle positions, all the way up against the East German border. Our war plans were always postured as a race with the other side to get the key terrain in our sector. We wanted it, and we didn't want them to have it. Instead of mobilizing the Corps and deploying it to our designated battle positions, General Franks paused. You know, the NR sequence tells you at a certain point you got to do certain things. And he paused. It was very deliberate, ordered intensified reconnaissance operations along that border. And to the degree we could, look deeper at East German garrison locations and assembly areas, while he ordered that the 7th Corps be brought to a readiness condition we used to call 1 Alpha, Redcon 1 Alpha. Recall the Corps, 2 hours, get every soldier back into garrison. Line up your vehicles, mount your crew serve weapons, mount your crews, your local ammunition stored in local bunkers, get all of that loaded. And then turn off your engines and stand by. No one moves unless ordered. And so we did for days, a week, maybe almost a couple weeks. We sat there and we listened to news reports of the Berlin Wall crumbling and the Iron Curtain collapsing all across Europe. It was 9 November 1989. And as you may recall, there was no Warsaw Pact invasion. But we did receive a horde of East German Trabants. Those little miniature cars, carrying East German families to the West to see whether the rumors that they had heard about the West and living in the West were true. And also to introduce themselves to their West German neighbor on the other side of the fence, to whom they had never spoken in 40 years. And then the biggest lesson for them was that in West German supermarkets, the vegetables and fruits that were stacked up in the counters were for consumption. They weren't propaganda displays. In the midst of this unexpected end to the Cold War, as General Franks has alluded, he allowed as how his confidence in the soldiers and leaders of 7th Corps to accomplish all assigned tasks and missions, even with a delayed start, deliberate delayed start, enabled him to be patient, to ensure that he had the right read on what was going on. In hindsight, had he followed the staff's insistence, mine included, to activate the war plan, it would very likely have triggered a response by the other side to which we would have responded. Escalatory measures, and who knows where that would have ended. So he taught us a valuable lesson that week about patience and the commander's responsibilities to get the decision right. Not just execute a plan, no matter how well crafted, no matter how well rehearsed. Commanders carry a larger burden. The larger lesson behind that tutorial for the staff was the faith he had in American soldiers to be better than anyone else in fighting where and when told, and to win wherever they fought. Well, that kind of confidence is a gift to any commander in the midst of crisis as you're struggling with decisions. But confidence in your formation, unmatchable. And I think those of you who went to Desert Storm with General Franks may even recall those attributes, his patience and his confidence. See that played and replayed in the Saudi desert as you set, reset, reposition, and set again to get ready to go. You know, an ancient philosopher once observed that in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And today we would be more gender respectful than Erasmus was back when he uttered that comment. But I still found the opportunity to hang that quotation in the tactical command post that I operated out of, primarily to encourage the youngsters who were working with me to help me envision the battle. See, the quotation by Erasmus can be about physical sight, but I don't think so. It's about vision, not sight. Less about the details of the frontline trace, though it has value, but more about the opposing commander's intent. Help me envision the battle and ensure that we are pursuing the right objectives. Now, we didn't always attain those objectives in our command post exercises, but we found a way not to defeat ourselves. Now, it's one thing to have vision, it's another to do something about it. When the Iron Curtain collapsed, General Franks quickly realized that our 40-year-old war plans were irrelevant. And he began immediately to remold our thinking in the Corps' warfighting concepts. From the defensive scheme we had crafted, rehearsed, and polished for decades, wherein forward deployed forces make initial contact with the enemy and trade space for time to allow CONUS-based reinforcing formations to arrive and complete the defense in depth to win the day. We had rehearsed those defensive concepts monthly through our Lariat Advance alerts and near annually through our Reforger exercises. We even rehearsed non-combatant evacuations for our families and Army civilians, each allowed to carry one bag, to the chagrin of Patty Shinseki. One bag. Well, the Berlin Wall fell, as I said, on 9 November 1989, and shortly thereafter, the Iron Curtain collapsed all across Europe. General Franks has alluded to this. General Tom Rame, whom I knew well, and the 1st Infantry Division of Fort Riley, Kansas, had been preparing for nearly a year to undergo its BCTP, Battle Command Training Program, BCTP warfighter exercise in March 1990. November 1989, March 1990. Most division commanders saw the warfighter as their graduation exercise. I know I did. And General Franks realized that the Corps' warfighting requirements suddenly changed with the fall of the wall. And the 1st Infantry Division at Riley had been preparing for a year to conduct a defense in sector oriented on a threat attacking from the east. On terrain, the Big Red One had reconnoitered repeatedly on Reforger exercises. So General Franks directed the 1st Infantry Division's warfighter scenario be totally overhauled, turned on its ear to require a long approach march, an attack from the march, oriented north and south, rather than east to west, over unfamiliar terrain, overturning years of reconnaissance notes, leader development seminars, battle book preparations. He intended to force all of us to deal with a new day. And then, as he indicated, he sent me to lead the advance party to Fort Riley in February 1990, November, February, to share the good news with General Tom Rame and help him get ready for his warfighter the following month in March. Tom and I had commanded the same brigade, the 2nd Send-Me Brigade in Kitzingen, Germany, 3rd Infantry Division, and knew each other well. But when I informed him of the major change in scenarios obviating a year's worth of staff work, he looked at me, squinted, screwed up his eyes as only Tom could, put his Denner tanker boots on the desk, and paused. And I knew what was going through his mind. And then he finally said, "How much time do I have?" To which I said, "The Corps Commander arrives in 10 days. To which he said, "Get out of here, G3, I've got work to do." Now, in my time, I've participated in a host of BCTP warfighter exercises, and I know there are some in here who even participated by running the program. My first go was as a battalion commander, then as a brigade commander, finally as a division commander. And when I served as Army Chief of Staff, I attended every division, corps, and corps warfighter exercise worldwide for 4 years. So I have a pretty good idea what a warfighter consists of. And looking back, even today, I can tell you that the 7th Corps had a great exercise in March 1990. There were a ton of lessons learned. And the 1st Infantry Division, from its commanding general to all of its subordinate commanders, and including those iron majors on the division staff who had ringside seats at after-action reviews so they could see firsthand what battalion and brigade commanders must do for the division commander to fight successfully. And those iron majors, many of them went on to command themselves. And I would tell you that Tom Rame did magnificently. Just the adjustments he made. Why is that important? A year later, February 1991, General Tom Rame was leading the Big Red One's breach of the Iraqi Republican Guard Forces defensive barrier, initiating that long attack during which all of you showcased 7th Corps' agility, initiative, determination. Vision counts when you do something about it. And then trust your soldiers and their instincts. And your commander, your Corps commander did. Another ancient philosopher, a Roman this time, reminds that poor is the nation that has no heroes, but poor still is a nation that has heroes and fails to remember and honor them. What 7th Corps is doing tonight and has done at your reunions in various locations over the past 30 years, 33 years, I guess, is to pay tribute to those who attacked the large Soviet armored surrogate formation that was prepared to defend in depth in an open desert. 7th Corps' objective to defeat Iraq's 9 divisions, especially the Medina, Tawakana, and the Hammurabi divisions, evicting them from Kuwait decisively. Now, immediately following the Corps' convincing victory, I watched and listened for lessons coming out of your spectacular operation. I certainly received enough queries from other nations' representatives serving with me there on a hardship tour in Italy. What the heck just happened? Wanting to know how was that possible? It was too soon then to have conducted the wealth of quality after-action reviews that would dissect in detail what it took to achieve such dominance. And I hope over time that book of how-tos has been assembled to illuminate leadership and command in battle during that period of 22 to 28 February 1991 in the Kuwaiti Desert, covering every aspect of Desert Shield, Desert Storm, from deploying forces from home garrisons in mature theaters, commercial power, roads, trains, to this inhospitable desert where if you didn't bring it, you didn't need it. What it took to prevail and dominate as part of the largest mounted operation since World War II, and involving every phase of operational warfighting, every aspect of combat support, combat service support activity, active and reserve components, mustering the requisite agility to transport, position, reposition again, thousands of tanks, armored personnel carriers, artillery pieces, helicopters, Bob McFarland's COSCOM, to fuel, water, arm, feed, fix. This armada over 300 kilometers in the long attack to destroy Iraq's divisions without interdicting your own formations as you traveled on parallel routes. I think there's still much to be learned from the 7th Corps' lessons in Desert Storm, as the Army today continues to transform itself in a current environment with large nation competitors back in the mix. I'm glad you were able to visit the National Museum of the U.S. Army at Fort Belvoir. I hope you found it a credible effort to capture the legacy of the American soldier through nearly 249 years of American history, and especially your piece of that legacy. That story is not complete. It never will be. Every day, the history of the U.S. Army grows. But at some point, a next phase of storytelling will become important to a future generation of Army leaders. And when that happens, the Army Historical Foundation, with which I am affiliated today, will be there to support them, just as Generals Gordon Sullivan, Bill Hartzog, and Roger Schultz, and George Casey, and generations of other soldiers who've put their hands and hearts together to preserve the legacy of the American soldier and to convey that legacy to future young Americans who will also be asked to serve just as you did. So I hope you found value in the Army's telling of your story. Americans and their families, especially those of our veterans, have the chance to walk those galleries with their children and grandchildren, explaining why we are a great nation that enjoys the privileges of peace, freedom, and liberty that we do. So come back for a visit, bring your family, bring your friends. And finally, in closing, as I told an AUSA audience recently, I didn't get to meet my Russian counterpart, Army Chief of Staff, until April 2002 in Moscow. I was retiring in 2003, so it was the very end of my tour. I never did get to meet my Chinese counterpart, though I spent 4 years trying to establish contact. So seconds into meeting the Russian Chief of Staff, he declared out of the blue, "We have the best tank." I was still shaking his hand, offering pro forma pleasantries. So caught a little bit flat-footed, I was trying to formulate a response when he quickly added, "But you have the best soldiers. You are the better Army." Cell phones are not yet the ubiquitous recording devices that they are today, and I wish I could have captured what he had to say. It would have made a hell of a recruiting ad. He was interested in changing his Army to to have professional, non-commissioned officers like the U.S. Army had developed. His request. And as we were ending our meeting that day, I thanked him for his compliments to the American soldier, but I also added that we had the better tank. He smiled. I mean, he's a little bigger than I am. He's about 6'4", 6'5", 300-pound Soviet tanker. He smiled, and our staffs rushed in to regain control. Watching video footage of Russian tank columns on their approach marches to Kyiv 2 years ago, we have the best soldiers, and we have the better tank. Like General Franks in those cold, unforgiving days of November 1989, I had confidence in our soldiers and our leaders to have studied our warfighting doctrine and honed the skills, knowledge, and attributes to win wherever they fought. Unless you do that, you can't innovate. You can't audible. Agility requires knowledge of your profession. And actually, so did General Karmiltsov, my Russian counterpart. You have the best soldiers. You are the better army. And the only thing he had to go on, this is 2002, the only thing he had to go on since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989 was Desert Storm. That decisive victory of an American-led coalition of forces in the desert, spearheaded by 7th Corps, ably supported by 18th Airborne Corps and something like 41 allied nations. So I hope you have helped the Army squeeze every ounce of learning from your magnificent display of American warfighting prowess. Our adversaries have certainly tried to, changing their doctrine, changing their strategic stance, where they position reserves. The use of force may not always be the best first solution, and so its use should always be judicious. But when the use of force is decided, go Jayhawk.
General Shinseki, former VA Secretary Shinseki, on behalf of 7th Corps Desert Storm Veterans Association, we deeply and profoundly thank you for your wisdom, your inspiring thoughts about Army and soldiering that can take an Army to war, as we did, as you all did, and go execute and fight and win, and what it takes to do that. A truly great American strategic and visionary thinker with his heart and soul rooted in the keys to victory are soldiers and non-commissioned officers. And sir, you inspire us tonight, and we are thrilled to have you and Patty in our presence. and I deeply value our own service together and our enduring and great friendship. And if Mark Rado can help me open this box. There you go. I would like to present you this box with a General Eric K. Shinseki, U.S. Army retired, 7th Corps DSVA, 17 February 2024, Jayhawk, and his own box coin.
Thank you so much. See, we're gonna see. Sergeant Major Hill, come on up here, Sergeant Major.
You heard Command Sergeant Major Hill at the memorial service today, and his long record of extensive and positions of high responsibility, First Sergeant, Platoon Sergeant, First Sergeant, Sergeant Major, Command Sergeant Major. And we'd like him to have a engraved box here with his own 7th Corps Desert Storm Veterans Association coin in measure of our affection to him for his duties performed and razor-sharp readiness of the soldiers of the Spearhead, the 3rd Armored Division, in their mighty attack as part of 7th Corps in Desert Storm from 24 to 28 February 1991. Command Sergeant Major, I value our friendship as well. Thank you.
Your mic, sir. Closing comments.
Thank you all for being here for this reunion. For Denise and me, we treasure our friendships with deep affection for all of you, for what you did in a time of great need for our nation and for our Army. It truly was a great victory. And I think what really capped it for me were a lot of things, but the story Command Sergeant Major Shrewsbury told this morning at our meeting, when he said that yesterday a young woman walked into the 7th Corps Operations Center and showed him a picture of a young girl in 1991 and said, "You, the American Army, you saved my life. You liberated my country." And that, I could see the tears. He was sitting beside of me, and tears well up in his eyes, as it did in my own, as they're doing right now. And that capped it all. So if you ever doubt you did anything worthwhile or significant in your life, just think about what you did on Desert Storm for that noble mission of liberating a country from oppression, true to our own values here in the United States of America. And Desert Storm was healing for our country as well. It reunited the country between those who serve and the American people in a way that was fractured during our time in Vietnam, and fractured no more when our country. And when that soldier said to me, "Don't worry, General, we trust you," and that happened to be a Spearhead soldier. Trust me to do what? Okay, the preparation, but to figure out how to make it turn into victory. And when it's not going in that direction, to have the courage to speak up, senior leaders in our military, to make sure it gets on that track. So all that service and sacrifice and training and teamwork and discipline achieve the objective and achieve that victory. And you all did that, as we heard General Shinseki so eloquently say today. And Sergeant Major Hill paid tribute to those who died doing that duty and to their families. God bless you all. I treasure our friendship and our enduring affection for our service and our service together on Desert Storm and together with Denise. I wish you all the very best. Safe trip home. And we'll see you all next year here at our 34th reunion. God bless you all. Thanks to Mark for his leadership. And to all of you, Jayhawk.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Sergeant First Class Adrian Doctor and the great brass quintet from the United States Army Band. Over to you, Sergeant Doctor.
Awesome, thank you. Hopefully it sounded like I heard some singing along, and I love that. My very favorite thing about being a musician in the United States Army Band is connecting with people through music. And among my favorite people to perform for are veterans, and it's just such an honor to be here with you all this evening. At this time, I'm going to welcome to the stage Sergeant Caroline Nielsen. You heard from her with the national anthem. And she's going to perform two pieces with us, God Bless the USA and the Army Song. So